Good Wednesday morning, and thank you for joining us here on KARE 11 News Now. I'm Jason Hackett. Let's get right to your headlines. Today marks 1 week since Renee Good was shot by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. This morning, the community is holding a prayer vigil at the site where she was shot. This comes as there is a major shakeup coming to the investigation into that shooting. Just in this morning, the surge of federal immigration enforcement in the Twin Cities isn't going away for at least a week. A federal judge ruled there is not enough time to go over the merits of the state's restraining order against the Trump administration. That restraining order, filed by Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, called the influx of immigration agents unlawful and characterized it as a federal invasion. It's trying to stop the agents from conducting the operation in our state. The judge in the case set a deadline of January 19th for the government to respond to the lawsuit and a January 22nd deadline for the state to respond to that. The future of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota is uncertain after 6 federal prosecutors resign over the Justice Department's push to investigate Good's death and her widow. Audrey Russo is here with details.
Yeah, it's been a mass exodus from Minnesota's U.S. Attorney's Office in the last 24 hours. The wave of resignations came after the Department of Justice pushed for an investigation into Renee Good's widow. The DOJ also says there's not enough evidence for a criminal civil rights investigation into the ICE agent who pulled the trigger. Minnesota's U.S. Attorney's Office now must move forward without its top fraud investigator, Joe Thompson, one of the 6 who resigned. Thompson led the Feeding Our Future case, and his work helped deliver dozens of convictions against people who stole taxpayer dollars. We spoke to a former prosecutor from Minnesota's U.S. Attorney's Office who says fraud cases currently in the works will likely slow down with these departures.
When you have new attorneys that have to learn the case and start doing it from scratch, that puts you behind. Many of them are going to have to start over again, so this is not helpful for prosecuting those subsequent cases.
Now, in the past, the DOJ's Civil Rights Division would typically launch an investigation to make sure officers didn't breach the rights of a shooting victim, even if no charges ever came of it. Back to you.
Audrey, thank you. Let's turn back to that prayer vigil now. It's happening at 34th and Portland. It started at 9:37. That's the exact moment Renee Good was shot and killed. Organizers say today is about pausing and not protesting, with a focus on quiet reflection, unity, and a prayer for peace in a community still grieving. They've made it clear there will be no marching or chanting, and attendees are being asked to participate in half-hour prayer shifts. Over the last week, several videos have surfaced showing heated exchanges in this area. Tensions organizers say they hope to avoid today as the goal remains healing and unity. This morning, the Department of Homeland Security says they've arrested 2,400 people since ICE operations started in Minneapolis on November 29th. Last Wednesday, ICE reported 1,400 arrests, though DHS says the number of arrests can lag. The surge of federal agents seemingly going nowhere soon. Tonight in Woodbury, a large turnout is expected at the city council meeting after reports that ICE is eyeing converting a warehouse there into a detention facility. That news first broke last month in the Washington Post, but the mayor says the feds haven't contacted her about possibly acquiring the building that is for sale. The newspaper claims the administration is considering it one of 16 new processing centers around the country that could hold 1,500 detainees. People are already voicing their concerns.
But most importantly, we can't afford it from a constitutional perspective, a due process perspective, and for sure, a humanitarian perspective. This isn't who we are in Minnesota, what's happening.
The Department of Homeland Security didn't respond to our questions, but told the Post it couldn't confirm its reporting and also didn't answer any questions. This morning, Minnesota-based groups are planning an economic blackout day in response to the ICE surge in Minnesota. That's planned for next Friday, January 23rd. The groups say they're encouraging Minnesotans to skip work, school, and avoid shopping. A prominent Minnesota business was also called out by those organizers.
If you're a business here in Minnesota, Target, we're looking at you. You're a homegrown business. And yet we've watched video after video of your own employees, some of them American citizens, being snatched from your halls. Stand up, speak out.
Faith leaders say the ICE Out Day will also serve as an opportunity for prayer and reflection for those participating. A major development for Somalis in the country under temporary protected status. The Trump administration is ordering they leave the United States by mid-March. Nearly all Somalis in Minnesota are U.S. citizens, according to the Census Bureau. Somalia was first designated for TPS in 1991 due to the Civil War, with the status extended ever since. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said, quote, "Temporary means temporary. Country conditions in Somalia have improved to the point that it no longer meets the law's requirement for temporary protected status." CARE Minnesota, however, disagrees.
It sends a dangerous message to even most clear humanitarian protections can be dismantled without regard for the reality. When protections are stripped from Somalis, despite undeniable conditions, the entire TPS program and the framework of it is broken.
DHS says those affected have until March 17th to self-deport, but CARE Minnesota is advising people to talk to an immigration attorney about possible other legal pathways to stay in the United States. Make sure you stay with KARE 11 as we follow this developing story. We'll share the latest updates as we learn them on air, online, and right here on KARE 11 Plus. Today, Governor Walz is speaking out about the impact of federal funding cuts on Minnesota. This comes as the state is appealing a decision by the Trump administration to withhold more than $2 billion in annual Medicaid funding for the state. This comes after the White House announced it's deferring payments to 14 Medicaid programs in the wake of fraud concerns. State officials say the funding cut is punitive, not corrective, and would damage health care across Minnesota.
Unfortunately, CMS's recent decision to withhold Medicaid funds is putting the people whom both agencies are sworn to serve at risk. Minnesota cannot absorb the loss of more than $2 billion in annual funding for these programs without catastrophic consequences for the people we serve.
The White House, meanwhile, says the state was warned last month about a potential funding freeze. We're live from the White House this morning, hours before a critical meeting between U.S. and Danish officials about Greenland. This comes days after Secretary of State Marco Rubio told Congress President Trump wants to buy the Danish territory. Ahead of the meeting, Greenland's prime minister told reporters the territory is not for sale. He said if he had to choose between Denmark and the U.S., he would rather stay with Denmark. Trump, meanwhile, argues Greenland is vital to U.S. security, saying the United States must own it to prevent Russia or China from occupying it. Well, this morning, as the Clintons face possible contempt charges for defying congressional subpoenas, some Democrats are saying the former president and former Secretary of State should testify before a congressional committee investigating Jeffrey Epstein. NBC's Alice Barr has the latest from Washington.
Hi there. The Clintons argue they're being unfairly singled out and have nothing material to add to the investigation, while leading Republicans say they're not accusing the former president of wrongdoing, but believe he may have more information to share. Contempt of Congress charges now looming for former President Bill Clinton, with the House Oversight Committee saying they'll take that rare step after the former president failed to appear for a deposition in the investigation into late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
He did not show up today.
Former President Clinton, who appears in a series of photos and records related to Epstein, has long denied wrongdoing or knowledge of Epstein's crimes.
No one's accusing Bill Clinton of any wrongdoing. We just have questions, and that's why the Democrats voted along with Republicans to subpoena Bill Clinton.
Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is scheduled to appear today, but in a letter to the House Oversight Chair, both Clintons declined, saying they had nothing to add, calling the subpoenas legally invalid, and writing, quote, "Every person has to decide when they have seen or had enough and are ready to fight for this country, its principles, and its people, no matter the consequences. For us, now is that time." Some Democrats arguing the Clintons should be allowed to answer in writing, as others have, and pressing the Justice Department to finish releasing the full Epstein files.
And then we'll be able to determine all that we need to know.
Though Democrat Ro Khanna, who helped lead the charge to force the files release, said former President Clinton should appear.
Everyone involved should be providing an explanation, and I have conducted this in a way that doesn't single out Republicans or Democrats.
Conflicting views in a high-profile push for answers. A Clinton spokesperson previously called on the Justice Department to make public anything tied to the former president in the Epstein files, accusing the DOJ of selective releases to imply wrongdoing where there is none. The Justice Department says it's still combing through the files for redactions, close to a month after a deadline to release them all. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
In other headlines, we're tracking new developments in the connection to the death of an infant at a daycare in Savage. Today, police will be revealing more information about an arrest made in that case. This happened at Rocking Horse Ranch back in September. 11-month-old Harvey Mucklebust was found unresponsive and later died. Just days earlier, police responded to another baby throwing up a, quote, blood-like substance at the daycare. Police haven't said who was arrested, the charges, or how they're connected to the daycare. Stick with us. More news and weather coming up after the break.